Hello, my name is Henrike Hahn, member of the European Parliament for the Greens EFA. I'm the spokesperson for industrial policy of the German Greens in the European Parliament, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you on the screens on the occasion of this webinar on the carbon contracts for difference, which is a crucial tool to speed up the green transformation of the energy-intensive industries. And all the participants will be able to ask questions in the second part of this webinar, so you will be involved as well. And of course, a very warm welcome to our excellent panel of experts to discuss the very important topic of carbon contracts for difference today. Just some technical details before we start. You will find some house rules posted in the chat box. And we also have translation from English to German and from German to English available. You only have to click at the globe symbol on your screen. Und ich sage es auch nochmal auf Deutsch. Wir haben heute eine Live-Übersetzung von Deutsch auf Englisch und andersherum. Und wer die deutsche Übersetzung aktivieren möchte, muss nur auf das kleine Globus-Symbol auf dem Bildschirm klicken, auf dem Dolmetschen steht. And the audience can ask questions in the Q&A section, which we will try to collect as best as possible and to try to answer in the second part of this webinar. But please feel free to start early with that to begin with. So on the panel, I'm joined today by my very dear colleague, Michael Kellner, Parliamentary State Secretary in the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, who is very interested in European affairs since a very long time, as I know, and he will give us an update on the status quo of carbon contracts for difference in Germany. I'm looking forward to it. And then we have Alexandre Paquot from the European Commission, Director of Innovation for Low Carbon and Resilient Economy in the DG Climate. He will give us a sense on where things stand in the European Commission and how long we will have to wait to see the first European EU CCfD. And then we have Marco Mensing. He is Director General of the European Chemical Industry Council, and he will tell us how CCfDs can help to decarbonize some of the production processes in the chemical industry. And then we also have Axel Eggert. He is Director General of the European Steel Association, and he is representing an industry that is immediately associated with the topic of the study, of course. And last, but most certainly not least, Mr. Pedro Linares, who among many things is a professor of industrial engineering at the ICAI School of Engineering, and who is one of the authors of the study that I issued about carbon contracts for difference to inform on my work on updating the EU industrial strategy. And of course, I'm very grateful for the study, and I'm really, really looking forward to go in all these details. And before we dive into this great topic with the presentation of the study by Pedro, let me say a few words to put some context to today's topical debate. So in the light of Putin's war against the Ukraine, the green transformation of the European industry and manufacturing is now even more necessary than ever before. And our dependency on fossil fuel imports is not only translating to high energy prices that are hurting households and the industries, but is actually already leading to a partial shutdown of production. And we need to act faster to implement an ambitious European Green Deal with a strong focus on green industrial policy. We should use the big potential of carbon contracts for difference to immediately trigger the switch to zero emission and highly energy efficient production technologies. And this is one of the crucial elements of the carbon contracts for difference. They should help the industry to make the necessary investments as soon as fast as possible. And I thus welcome the European Commission proposal to use the Innovation Fund for granting such contracts and changing the state aid rules to accommodate national CCfDs schemes. So European as well as national carbon contracts for differences can and should coexist because both are needed to fund innovations, to bring zero emission technologies to an industrial scale and to support their diffusion within the industrial sectors. And for that purpose, we need to address the impact of the EU ETS price volatility and its potential negative effect on the size of the innovation fund, which could cause problems granting long-term CCfDs. So we should also think about complementary additional recovery and resilience facility type of funding instruments. And in any case, a European approach should allow for sector-specific tender designs, meaning tenders for the steel industry, tenders for the chemical industries, and others. And it should also focus on the competitiveness of CCfDs and especially support lower income member states to have access to sufficient funding. So we cannot let smaller and less wealthy member states behind in this generational challenge. I think this is a very European perspective I have here, and it's definitely necessary to have that, in my opinion. And these are very difficult times. We have to fight for a competitive and green industry to have high quality and high paying jobs here in Europe in decades to come. So CCfDs and other state aid instruments cannot solve all the problems we're facing at the moment or all the challenges we are facing, but they can at least contribute by giving investors the long-term security which is desperately needed. And for my work on the report on updating the EU industrial strategy, which started right 2 days after Putin invaded the Ukraine, I thus issued a study by Pedro Linares and Timo Gerres, who were also working closely together with colleagues from the German Institute of Economic Research to emphasize the importance of those instruments in the transformation pathways of the energy-intensive industries. And this is now the perfect hint to the presentation of Pedro Linares. Thank you very much for your wonderful study on this carbon contracts for differences. And I hope it will contribute in a very constructive way on the debates at the European level as well as the national levels. And dear Pedro, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes, and we're looking forward to your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrike. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and to have the opportunity to present this study. Let me share my screen and use some slides, mostly as a guidance of what I'm going to be talking about. First, let me say, as Henrike mentioned, that this is joint work with a colleague, Timo Gerres, but it's also based on intensive interaction and joint work that we have been having with the CFMP, which is the Climate Friendly Materials Platform. This is a group of researchers and think tanks across Europe, together with convened by Climate Strategies. We have been working for the last years to try to help the transformation of industry towards a low carbon competitive one. So we always say decarbonization without relocation. And during all these years, we have been working on a set of instruments. I'll mention some later, and CCfDs is one of those. So I would like to thank all my colleagues in the platform for all the very fruitful discussions we have been having. So many of you will already know what is a CCfD, a carbon contract for differences, but I'll try to explain it a bit, quite shortly, quite succinctly, given that we only have like 10 minutes. So I'm going to give a basic introduction. I encourage everybody to read the report. And of course, if you have more questions, we are happy to address them and to answer them and to provide you with more materials. So a carbon contract for difference is basically a contract by which two parties engage in order to secure a fixed carbon price over a given time period. So this is basically on substance, it is basically a way to secure a fixed carbon price, to hedge against the volatility of the carbon price, which, as you know, can be quite high depending on the period. And therefore, particularly for those who are considering an investment in a low carbon technology, to ensure that that low carbon technology will be competitive under this fixed carbon price. So it helps remove regulatory uncertainty, and to some extent, it also helps cover technological uncertainty. This would be the basic CCfD, but on top of that, we can also add a layer of technology support. That is, instead of just securing the expected carbon price, we can top that up with an additional level of support to provide an additional incentive to industry, for example, to address knowledge spillovers or the inherent uncertainty that we have in technology development. So these two elements can be combined into a certain strike price, that is a fixed price, that will be compared continuously with the current market price, with the current EU ETS market price. So when the strike price is below the current carbon price, the agent, the industry in this case, would have to give back the difference. But when the strike price is set above the market price, then the government must compensate the industry to pay for this difference, therefore to ensure this consistent and constant market price for carbon. Again, this helps the industry ensure that they are going to have a constant source of revenue or a constant source of competitiveness in their carbon market price. Why are these instruments particularly attractive? Well, we think there are basically three elements here. One, it is a very useful commitment device because the government is interested in, by engaging in these contracts, remember my past figure, the government has to pay whenever the market price is below the strike price, the negotiated price. So the government has an inherent incentive to keep ETS prices as high as possible, or within, of course, certain limits. Therefore, there is an incentive not to try to water down the European ETS. And this is a particularly interesting thing. And it also removes the incentive to try to expropriate the rents of innovation. Let me explain that very briefly. What happens if industry starts investing in low carbon technologies? Then the demand for carbon allowances will go down, the market price will go down, and therefore the inventors will not be able to recover their investment through the carbon market price. Again, by having this incentive to keep market prices up, we ensure that we have enough innovation incentives for everybody. The second important element is that, as I already explained, the carbon contract for differences hedges you against lower carbon price, and it also helps you support particular technologies depending on the interest in that we have in those technologies for decarbonization, for diffusion of these technologies. And thirdly, by providing a safe, a stable carbon price, it reduces the cost of financing those large investments that industry has to make. So that is, of course, a very important element when the changes that we need to transform our industry are strongly based in investment cost and not that much in operation cost, which is the case in most times. It also has an additional social value, which is that it brings back the dynamic efficiency, the constant incentive for innovation that we need in order to decarbonize fully our industry in 2050, as expected in all European governments, or even earlier. As Henrike said, in this context, that we want to decarbonize as fast as possible. Now, one thing that I would like to mention is that, of course, CCfDs are not the silver bullet that will solve industry decarbonization. This has to be combined with a larger package. We need more things. So, for example, we need a carbon contract for difference will not introduce any incentive for material efficiency, for example, which is also very important if we want to promote the circular economy. This can be achieved, for example, with a climate contribution. This carbon contract for difference is not addressing, for example, those industries which need to decarbonize larger shares of renewables. Again, here we could use contract for differences for renewables, for renewable power. If we want to create a larger market, we may need green public procurement or product carbon requirements. So all this has to be integrated within a larger framework in which, of course, CCfDs are going to play a very strong part in terms of reducing the risk associated with the innovation and with the diffusion required to have all these technologies penetrating in our industrial sector. Now, of course, the big question or a big discussion issue is, should this be done at the national level? Should it be done at the European level? And there are advantages and disadvantages, of course. I should say that this can already be done by member states subject to state aid guidelines, right? Any member state can already use this instrument to help their industry as long as this is consistent with industrial policy guidelines. However, we also need to think that we may have some disadvantages when using this exclusively at the national level. For example, we may not have a number of companies competing for these CCfDs large enough, so there may be lack of competitiveness in the allocation of CCfDs. Or we can also, if we apply it only at the national level, we may have unfair competition between different member states. Henrike already mentioned that poorer member states will have fewer funds to pay for this CCfD. So if we also want to address solidarity, competitiveness within the European Union, as well as competitiveness within industry in order to get the best options to decarbonize, I think we need a European approach. That European approach can take different shapes, from a European managed auction for CCfDs connected, for example, with the Innovation Fund, or with a European-based set of guidelines that all countries need to apply to the design of the national CCfDs. So there are different flavors that we can use, and of course the jury is still out on what is the best approach. But I think the European perspective here is really important. We cannot afford to leave CCfDs just to the national level without any degree of coordination, because that would create a lot of problems. So that would be the basics of CCfD. Then, of course, as you know, the devil is in the details, and designing CCfDs correctly will take some time, because we can have like fixed prices, variable prices, index prices. For example, in some cases, it might be interested to connect the CCfD price to the gas price, because that drives the competitiveness of the low carbon technologies. We can also talk whether those CCfDs should be auctioned or should be negotiated. It all depends on the number of participants in the industry. Also, some conversation has been had about whether in principle CCfDs are two-sided options. As I already explained, when the strike price is higher than the market price, the government will pay the difference. But when the market price is above the strike price, industry will pay the difference. Well, some other approaches only consider a one-side option in which only one side pays. We also need to agree on the duration, on who has to sign it. And this is also particularly important, because although in principle we are thinking about governments being the counterparties here with industry, this is not necessarily the case. We can also have a business-to-business CCfD. This can be engaged by private parties, industry with some demand, for example. And then a very important question is, how do we allocate these CCfDs in terms of sectoral interests? Whether, for example, we have to work on a project-specific basis, where it has to be open to all industry to allow for more competition. Whether we need to separate industry per maturity pots, for example, so that only technologies who are in the same level of readiness will be able to compete for this, right? Another very important element that we need to take care of is the interactions with other policies. For example, the Innovation Fund. The Innovation Fund is rather limited in its scope. So it can only apply, for example, for first-of-a-kind plants. But if we want to use CCfDs for broader diffusion, probably the Innovation Fund is not the right vehicle. We need to think of other vehicles. Another interesting development is the CBAM. You are all familiar with the development of CBAM of the European Parliament and the European Commission. The CBAM is very important for this, because basically, if we implement CBAM and we remove free allocation, this is going to change the way in which we have to design CCfDs, because CCfDs, what we are doing is we are ensuring a fixed price for all the extra allowances that now industry is not going to need because they have moved to a low carbon alternative. Now, if they don't have the free allowances, they cannot sell anything. So we have to change a bit the design of the CCfD, because now the vehicle will have to be different. Also, of course, the CCfDs are very much connected with the ETS, because they're a function of the ETS price, and they are very much connected with free allocation. So these are all elements that we need to take care of when designing the CCfD. Now, of course, the last question that I think is inevitable is, do we still need CCfDs in the current energy crisis that is increasing gas prices and therefore is making low carbon options more competitive? We think there is still space and there is still a need for CCfDs because we don't think that this crisis, in spite of the gas prices, are incentivizing investment, because basically what we have is a volatility crisis, which creates a lot of uncertainty, and this uncertainty is not helping for investment. So if we want to bring back certainty, if we want to bring back security for investors, I think CCfDs are going to provide a very important tool here, although of course they can be indexed to gas prices to minimize the expenses required. And that's all I wanted to say. I hope I stick to the 10 minutes allocated. And of course, I'll be happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you very much, dear Pedro. That was very interesting and full of details, of course, but very relevant. And then I will give the floor to Michael Kellner, who will tell us about when we can expect German CCfDs and how they will look like. And maybe also you could say some words about the importance of these instruments for the industrial policy strategy of the German government, if applied. So, dear Micha, looking forward to your thoughts as well. Thanks.
Well, Henrike, thank you for having me here, and thank you for this very interesting study. You asked about the importance, and I will say, as perspective of the German government, we will take some emergency measurements according to the temporary crisis framework of the European Union to stabilize gas prices and energy prices at all. And we'll do that in next year till 2024. But it's clear that, being Europe with a strong industrial base, we need to get these prices down. We need to get power price, electricity prices down. And therefore, these carbon contracts for differences are one important instrument. Let me say it's not the only instrument. We already heard some instruments, but we also will have PPAs. We are working on green industrial electricity prices, but the CCfDs are in a way important on a long-term perspective. And the government compensates the additional costs of climate-friendly production processes compared with the conventional production processes by giving a grant to the company. And the idea is, having OPEX stabilized for a period of time. And in the coalition talks last year, we agreed to establish and conclude CCfDs and earmark the budget of around 20 billion euro for this purpose. And the German Ministry of Economics and Climate Action have been working on the design of the funding program of these contracts together with over 20 experts. Companies and other stakeholders were able to give their input in May this year. Based on this, a draft of funding guideline has been prepared, and we are just currently finalizing it. And parallel, we started already talks with the EU Commission, and we will hope that we have a notification procedure hopefully finished by February 2023. So that's, Henrike, your question about the timetable. So we hope that in the first quarter of 2023, the first climate protection contracts can be concluded. So it's an ambitious timetable, but we try it. But as I mentioned in the beginning, there are more than one instrument. For sure, through limited financial resources, and we only will be able to, to have certain amount of agreements with a limited number of companies, and therefore we probably will include certain industrial branches like steel, chemicals, glass, cement, and so there will be some restrictions. In a way, we're thinking about how it works. In a standard case, companies can offer a price avoiding a ton of CO2 through climate-friendly production. And the company that bids the lowest price and those saves most CO2 most efficiently will be awarded the contract. And then it's important, as we just heard, and I will underline that. I mean, the price is also linked to the CO2 price, or the price for H2, right? And so we will have a design to avoid strong over or strong under subsidies. So therefore, we map it in both directions towards the CO2 price. And there will be, of course, obligations within these climate protection contract. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a contract, right? So there must be, first of all, reporting obligations, some kind of transparency, so that we can calculate the payments, and so we have standardized extensive transparency obligations to detect also breaches, of course. And if there would be breaches, I hope not, there would be also the possibility of sanctions. So that's the basic idea we are working on, and I hope I gave you in that few remarks some insights, what we are planning, what our timetable is, and I'm very much looking forward to implement that. I think it would be a huge step forward to come along with climate-friendly production processes. So I think it's really important that we are able to make that work.
Thank you very much, dear Micha. I really appreciate your thoughts here. I heard that you are still with us till 4:45. So we have a chance. Maybe if you are quick with our other experts, or rather precise to go into the discussion again as well. But first of all, we come also to Mr. Alexandre Paquot. Thank you very much for being with us today. The Commission is playing a key role for the availability of carbon contracts for differences throughout Europe. And so we are glad if you tell us what the situation is in DG Climate and how important this topic is for the current Commission. And when we will see the first EU CCfD and how will it look like? I would like to ask you that question as well in a wonderful, smiley way. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Henrike, and good afternoon, dear colleagues. Yes, very happy to be invited to your panel. I think it's extremely timely. I think you said it all, Henrike, in your introduction, that we are facing this climate and energy crisis, and as part of the solutions, the answers to that, we clearly need to decarbonize industry. And for that, we need legislation, we need targets, but we also need financial support, technology support. And I think the presentation from Pedro was extremely interesting, also giving the broader picture. We are here focusing our attention on carbon contract for difference, but I think we need to keep in mind the other type of instruments which can really very much support the needed transition to decarbonize industry. And as part of that, I think several speakers already mentioned the Innovation Fund. I think we are all quite big fan of this fund It is about 40 billion euros recycled from the revenues of ETS and going back to industry to decarbonize. And this money needs to be spent on the best possible way. And this is what we are doing. And we have been doing it through grants. This has been, I would say, the main way to deliver the support to industry through grants for large-scale projects, first of a kind demonstration projects. And last week, actually, or 2 weeks ago, we launched the third call for 3 billion euros. And for the first time, this call has very specific windows, looking in particular at supporting electrification and hydrogen in industry for more than 1 billion euros, but also looking at the whole value chain, because I think here we really have to keep in mind that we want to support industry to decarbonize, but we also want to create innovation in Europe and to have the value chain in Europe and to support also the component manufacturers. When we talk about hydrogen, for instance, having production of the most innovative electrolysis taking place in Europe, for instance. So with the Innovation Fund and this third large-scale call, we are really targeting also the innovation in this value chain. So now, beyond this aspect of grants, which are absolutely necessary, in particular for this, I would say, most innovative projects, we need to be supported for becoming commercially viable. We are also looking at other type of what we call competitive bidding mechanism, and carbon contract for difference is one of them. Why are we looking at that? Because we see many advantages for such instruments. First, this is a very cost-effective way in distributing financial supports, and I think we had very good success stories in the field of renewable power. But also with such type of instrument, we will allow for very transparent price discovery. So we will know what is the true real price of a particular technology, of a particular new product. And that's, I would say, a better way than having, let's say, officials in a building deciding, what is the best price for a particular product. But here, with this competitive bidding, we're really looking at making price discovery and market formation. And also, thirdly, we see these instruments as very powerful to de-risk investments. And I think it was already said previously, we need investment to happen, and industry will invest if they see very much a very clear and certain way to environments to provide them certainty for investing. And this instrument will also help to really leverage as much private capital as possible. So for all these good reasons, and I think Pedro already mentioned many of them, we see this competitive bidding as a very, I would say, promising instrument. And we have been proposing to amend the ETS directive so that the Innovation Fund is not only used, as Pedro was saying, for a first-of-a-kind project, but also for deploying and upscaling projects throughout Europe. And I heard several of the speakers already talking about the European dimension. Probably we can speak about it in a minute. But with the innovation, we really bring truly a European perspective to this instrument. So we made this proposal by the revision of the ETS. This is now up for discussion in the co-decision. So I hope we will very soon have the green light from the co-legislator to really make that in practice. Then secondly, with the Repower EU, there was a clear commitment by the Commission to really launch this competitive bidding through a contract for difference for hydrogen, for green hydrogen. And I will come back to that in a minute. But also, you know that our president made clear in the State of the Union speech that she wants to see an hydrogen bank in Europe. And with the Innovation Fund and this competitive bidding, we will have one element of the domestic leg of this bank. And why I'm now talking about contract for difference, while I think the title of the conference is Carbon Contract for Difference. And I think maybe just 1 minute of element to indicate that basically these are very similar instruments, but the main difference is that with the contract for difference, the reference price is the product itself. So here, basically the price of hydrogen, so fossil hydrogen, would be the reference price, while for the carbon contract for difference, the carbon price would be the reference price. But basically, we see that as very much two sides of the same coin. Now, why are we starting our pilot phase with hydrogen and not other green products? And I'm sure we will hear from Axel and Marco in a minute that there are also many other type of green products which could be supported by such type of instruments. Basically, in our analysis, we see that hydrogen and green hydrogen plays a key role, because to decarbonize either steel or chemicals, we would need hydrogen, green hydrogen. And this is a bulk of the additional costs. And this is why we want to start with looking at hydrogen. Now, Henrike, you asked me where do we stand? So when can we have these first calls and auctioning to happen? First, we need to have the legal framework in place. So this is our top priority. Secondly, and I think Pedro said it right, the devil is in the details. So we need to get these first auctions right. And there are many design elements which needs to be decided open. And we are currently carrying out a very thorough public consultation. We had at the end of October a workshop with 120 participants from academia, think tank, member states. We have on Monday a workshop with more than 600 people really going to help us to design in the best possible way this first auction. So it will take a bit of time, but we want to do it right. It is first time we will launch such type of initiative, of new instruments. So we are, I would say, we need also to look at what is happening elsewhere, and the experience in Germany and in the UK will be extremely helpful. And let me conclude by saying that, of course, for doing that as part of the Innovation Fund, we need a good size for the Innovation Fund. And currently, big discussion in the co-legislator about the size of the Innovation Fund. So this is still up for discussion. Also the discussion regarding the Repower EU and whether part of the Innovation Fund would contribute to the Repower EU financing. So still many open issues, but we hope that very soon we have clarity and we can really start, I would say, the work on the actual auctioning. So this panel is a very timely panel, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Alexandre. That was very, very interesting. And I'm sure you will also get a lot of questions from our audience and other panelists in the open discussion. And please, dear audience, at the screens, feel free to post your questions already in the chat, because then we can see that in time. And of course, we cannot discuss this topic without the input of the industry, which is why I'm very happy to have two important industries represented here today. Mr. Mensing represents the EU chemical industry and will tell us about the relevance and also the things that need to be considered in designing CCfDs for the chemical sectors. Thanks for being with us today. And also thanks, I think you have still a couple of minutes, dear Michael Kellner, to listen to us, but we are very grateful as well that you're here and to listen to your perspectives. And dear Mr. Mensing, so you have the floor for another 8 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Henrike. If you allow me, with Michael still here, I'll use 1 minute to say, don't fight the IRA, but copy as much as you can. Not only looking at the Brits, but also at the Americans. That's a debate where I'm going to end up as well. But lots of interesting developments in the US, where investing in carbon becomes a business model, which is something that we're working towards in this scheme as well. A small remark as well, that some people have commented that I'm wearing a hoodie on quite an official meeting as a CEFIC Director General. But as I told you, the climate conference brought me a lot of good things, but also a positive COVID test. So forgive me for my hoodie and not a suit and a tie coming in from home. The reason I still wanted to be here is the importance of the topic. That's clear. If you look at chemicals, let me split it clearly. There's about 29,000 chemical companies in Eurostat. There's 11,000 of a certain size that are our members in Germany, VCE's members, for example. And there's, of course, all the big household names, you know, which is about 70 companies who are in our membership. Now, why mentioning that? Because the issues at the table are not only where the big companies invest, but especially in the German context, if we can make the Vorstand of the Mittelstand move forward and also survive with the current energy crisis, they're the ones most impacted, where some of our global companies actually still have solutions overseas to balance their results. If you look at those groups and at the technologies at hand, electrification is going to be crucial, and that's where we're equal to steel. Electrification indirectly through hydrogen brings a competition for electrons, something to note as well, and an infrastructure question on pipelines, on electricity, as much as anything else. Now, what we have in CEFIC is a IC 2050 model where we can make multiple roadmaps from today to zero by changing the electricity price, the hydrogen price, and working on a complete model of the industry, learn from those pathways towards 2050. And you see the electric cracker will come by 2030. You see the relevance of renewable methanol. You see the relevance of large heat pumps coming in. But you also see that the price and the cost levels, even before the war, were not competitive enough always to have the investment be made here. And that's the point I'd like to raise. That's the joint interest that Axel Eggert and myself have, which is it's not only to invent it, but it's invest in it and invest in it in Europe, which is the key puzzle we need to break. Now, with Axel from the steel sector, we worked along for a long time. We're old-timers in the ETS, but we worked on IPCEIs, one model to also still look into, the project of common European interest. We had the high-level roundtable on energy-intensive industries, which already listed the carbon contracts for difference as an option. And we were at the start of the Innovation Fund, where that's indeed, as Alexandre said, the tool everyone is happy with, and where you see large chemical projects come forward. Maybe a critical remark, the first Innovation Fund was 1 billion, and there were 21 billion of projects submitted. And that's where if I see CCfD money will float out of the Innovation Fund, it hurts me a bit on the inside. I would hope we would get it next to the Innovation Fund and very much fund it from something else than where already a good use of the money should be. If you look at the different tools and the different tools in the mix, there's a clear role for the CCfDs. So we're very interested in it. We have a number of technical remarks, and one of it is that you see most of the innovations in our sector will depend on OPEX issues, not necessarily CAPEX being the first as such. And the inclusion of feedstock and fossil commodities in this striking price will become relevant. It's not just carbon alone. So it's going to be a more complex one. I appreciate Mrs. Hahn's remark to maybe look at sectoral applications. I would still link it to what the climate law said, which asked for sectoral climate roadmaps, which so far we haven't seen much move on, but which could be combined in this case. And for that reason, CEFIC and the chemical industry very much drive on what is now called a transition pathway in the ecosystem of energy intensive industries under the industrial policy of Mr. Breton. This is Binglish, Brussels English, not necessarily English, but transition pathway or sectoral climate roadmap or sectoral application of CCfDs. I think it all goes in the same direction. So positive attitude on the chemical industry side. I think also in cooperation with steel, with lots of overlap, and you'll see that Axel Eggert in a minute will take over in a similar fashion as I do. But maybe just the one philosophical remark. We've seen the noise on the US IRA. We see that, and this is a political one, we might actually choose to support Mr. Biden on helping reduce emissions and not attack him. We also see that it's a very profitable business model, what the US is building for its industry to invest in low carbon emissions. That's something where we have to pay proper attention, because still with the positiveness of CCfD, we take money out of industry, it's put in an innovation fund, then we take it out of the innovation fund, and then parts of all the money taken out of industry will come back, which is a fundamentally different model than what the US is applying, where with the tax breaks, you get an accelerator. So if we study the CCfDs, we'd be really interested to apply it to the front runners, because that's what we're talking about, get the front running investments to Europe, but also think through what, not the laggards, but the middle pack, the large mass of industry that needs to transform, how we can get solutions there. Because for that large group, actually these tools would be unaffordable and the state wouldn't have enough money to do so. So this kind of reflection on the total economic system around the CCfD, I think will help us in a good design as well. But overall, thank you very much for doing this on a Friday afternoon. Thanks for having me. Thanks for pushing a tool that can help our companies. For the one and last line, I will repeat. It's in my interest, your interest, our interest, that this new technology actually comes to Europe and the first of a kind is built here. And as long as we share that dream, then we're in good shape. Thank you, Ms. Hahn.
Thank you very much, dear Marco Mensing, for your perspective, including the chemical industry perspective. And we will now jump to our second industry representative, who I heard also used to work for some years in the European Parliament. And Mr. Eckert, we are very happy that you could join us today as well. And as I said in the beginning, CCfDs are closely associated with the needs of the steel industry as well. So please give us your take on the topic. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Henrike. So thanks also for the invitation. And the report, I believe, is very useful. I think it's a success, this report. It includes all the elements which we are talking about. And therefore, it provides a very good basis for further thought and implementation of CFDs. CFDs is a crucial issue for our industry. And therefore, I would like to show you why the urgency in our industry is so huge for such a tool. And I have only one slide to present to you to demonstrate that the European steel industry is working since 2003 on projects, and they are now ready to be implemented at industrial scale. We have currently 60 projects, large-scale projects running to be implemented before 2030. And the potential CO2 abatement of those projects is 82 million tons of CO2. That is more than 1/3 of the entire emissions of our industry. This is really huge. And it is around about 2% of the entire CO2 emissions of the European Union. So of course, there is a huge need in terms of capital investment, but also the operational costs are the biggest question mark, actually. And if you see here on the slide, 54 billion euros operational cost, that is pre-energy crisis estimations. We will need only for these projects by 2030, 165 terawatt hours of electricity, and more than half of that would be used for the production of hydrogen. And of course, this electricity should be low carbon or carbon neutral. There comes the urgency, and also then thanks for the Mr. Kellner that you have done the work in Germany to put this into place next year, because this is really timely. These projects have started partially. They need to be implemented by 2025. We have the first blast furnace being switched over to new technologies, for example, direct reduced iron with electric arc furnace technology, where we can use hydrogen, for example. And these technologies enable us to become almost completely carbon neutral by 2050 or even before, for depending on the supply with clean electricity and hydrogen. So it's really urgent that we have these tools tools to de-risk this investment. So that is the first point. It's the urgency. The second point which I wanted to make is that there needs to be sufficient financial resources. I think that has been just discussed before. The Innovation Fund itself is providing funding, and we fully support the Commission here and the EU institutions to also provide funding for CFDs, but it's too small. And we are also of the opinion that, yes, national funding is important, but EU funding needs to be scaled up at the same time. It was mentioned, I think, by Henrike in the beginning of the meeting, that we need also some member states where there are less capacity to make this investment to support them. The third point is that now I just want to add to what Marco has said on the US Inflation Reduction Act, which again shows the urgency of such a measure. Our companies are now thinking where to invest, and this is really concrete. And the US Inflation Reduction Act is something where a lot of certainty for the companies is provided, where they can calculate already whether they have a business case or not. We need this type of certainty in Europe as well, and very soon. And the Contracts for Difference is such a tool which can provide that. The third point I wanted to make is the target of which sectors should be targeted, and then of course those which have the most potential to reduce CO2 in huge volumes. And the steel industry and the chemical industry are such examples, but also, and I think Marco mentioned that, there should be a sectoral approach. It would not be good now to compete between sectors. So that could also lead to a situation where in the one sector we will see investment, but not in the other, and that should be avoided. So the fourth point is that we agree with the variable strike price. That means indexation of certain components of the CFD. But it should not only concern, I think in the report, coke and coal is mentioned, but it's very important also to consider energy and raw materials. Energy, have just spoken, that is the big question mark for all energy intensive industries. We do not know what the price will be. From today's perspective, the price is too high. So that needs definitely also to be tackled within CFDs for the industry. And the last point, including in that, is that we need a strike price that covers the full effective abatement cost gap between CO2 low steel and conventional steel. So only that would provide a business case. On the other hand, it needs, of course, to be clearly fixed that there should not be any type of over subsidization. We agree to that. One example is if reducing the aid by the CO2 price. So for example, if the CO2 price is 100 euros and a ton of steel costs in its production 600 euros, so together with the CO2 cost is 100 euros. So if we simply reduce the CO2 price, then we will still have an uncompetitive price of the product. So that needs to be considered here. Of course, there needs to be made the balance between free allocation and the real carbon costs per ton of steel or per operation. And the last point is that CFDs should be allowed to cover the entire period of the investment. And that is in the steel industry, but also in other energy intensive industries, up to 20 years, depending on the projects. And if you compare the support which has been given to renewables since 2007, that we are talking about 700 billion euros. And for the energy intensive industries, therefore, there should also sufficient support in terms of financing and also with regard to a sufficient long period. I think I stop here, and hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Axel Eggert. I really appreciate it. And I think we have the chance now to make a short round of all the panelists to respond to the interventions of their co-panelists. So if you have still something in mind, this is the place to say it and to comment in. So maybe if you're still here with us, dear Michael Kellner, I would put you first here. Then we have a short reaction from your part. That would be very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I do have to run, but I was interested to hear what Mr. Menzing and Mr. Eggert had to say. Please apologize me, but I have to be in the next meeting and I have to run. But it was very valuable insights from the report. Thanks, Henrike, what you did, and thanks to your comments, Mr. Eggert and Mr. Menzing. And just let me add, very well aware that we also see some development in the US. I will put it in a more diplomatic way, and it's really from uttermost importance for us to come forward with measurements like CCfDs to have a competitive environment and getting rid of CO2 emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being with us. Pardon, we really appreciate it. And then, dear Mr. Alexandre Paquot, maybe you have something to add here on this time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's the first, I would say, panel interventions were extremely, I would say, helpful because they show the clear willingness, both from the side of the public sector and the side from industry to, I would say, invest strongly in this type of instrument, because we see the powerful result that they can have. We see also the complexity of them. I think there are still many elements that we still need to look at in terms of the design to do it right. But we also see the big potential it has. Also take good note of what Axel and Marco were saying about the size of this intervention. That needs to be a sizable intervention. And that brings me again to this issue of, at the level of the European intervention, how big the innovation fund will be. And I think, as I said, this is still open for debate in the co-legislators process. And we truly hope that there will be sufficient, I would say, funding to really carry out this initiative with a real, I would say, added value. And I also take very good note that this is not the only instrument, that it should be seen in combination with other instruments, other intervention, be at national level. Also, industry will have a key role to play. So I think we can really go hand in hand through this transition pathway, as Marco was saying, to really support this transition and make it a success. So I think this was a very, very useful, I would say, first exchange of views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then, dear Marco Menzing, do you have immediate reactions to your co-panelists and all the opinions we just heard? Thank you.
Absolutely. Besides that, it's a cool panel. So thank you for that. Maybe 2 points to raise. The one thing I did not completely get from Pedro and the report is that I don't think there's a relation between CCfD and the intention of governments to keep the carbon price high or not. I'm one of the few people who's not very impressed with carbon market traders, because it's really easy in a market which gets down by a factor every year. So the price will go up. There might be a temporary itch in between, but it will go up. Now, that high carbon price is needed for us also to defend the investments to our CEOs. And that's, I think, the really time pressure we're now in. We had a number of these large projects, and Axel showed them as well, lined up, prepared, thought through, going through the Innovation Fund. And with the current energy crisis being discussed again at global head offices, because we don't think this energy crisis is here for this winter, but probably 3 to 5 years, if you read it well, which brings the question on the European competitiveness overall. So any good news we can give of new designs or new means to guarantee to the global investment community that their next project will actually not only survive, but be in the money and then be able to stand on its own feet, because that's going to be important. It cannot be lifelong support. I think is very important. It's the signal that the IRA gave to the global investment world as much as the content. And I think we can have the same here. On the innovation fund, I'm going to remain my stubborn, don't take money from there, take it from elsewhere, or add it to it, because all the money in the innovation fund will need definitely to get things going. On hydrogen, maybe for Alexandre, coming out of the COP, you saw the boost on green hydrogen. Pretty much every stand in Egypt was about green hydrogen. And you saw also Ursula von der Leyen sign a number of agreements. Green hydrogen, absolutely the way to go, but the price has to come down. It's still way more expensive than the gray hydrogen already on site and in our processes. And if CCfDs can help there, I think that's a big step forward. So thanks, Mrs. Hahn. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And then, dear Axel Eggert, do you have an immediate reaction as well?
I was already the last speaker, so I could already react somewhat. One thing is very important. We as the European steel industry, but also other sectors, but steel is exporting 20 million tons of steel. We are importing 30 million tons of steel every year. So we are in fierce competition with other industries, steel companies around the globe. And therefore, we need to make sure that there is also not a disadvantage for our products which we put on the global market. There's a huge discussion right now on exports under the CBAM. I hope there will be found a good way forward for that, because we risk that we really destroy our market with our own products if they do not find a place in the global market. And we also, at the same time, we want to export green steel. So we need to think about how can we do that. We have, if you have a difference in price of 200 or 300 euros on the global market with the green steel, we will not find anyone buying it. So what we can solve with the CFDs here in the transition, maybe more a challenge even on the global market, but we have to find solutions for that. And then on the internal market, it is very important that we, with such tools, and it has been said, there is a whole set of tools, but the CFDs will contribute to creating a market for green steel in Europe. And once we have a first sustainable market for green steel, green chemicals in Europe, that means a certain share of green products in the market, then we can also think about other measures. And I'm thinking about standards, for example, where the most CO2 intensive products will be cut off the European market. So that would also create then new market fields for the European steel industry, where they can substitute these high CO2 intensive products with European production on our own market.
Thank you very much. And then we come to Pedro Linares. Thank you very much, dear Pedro, for stimulating this wonderful discussion we have just because of you and your wonderful study. For all of us, if you want to reread the study, you can find it on my homepage, of course. But of course, now we are very interested in your thoughts or reactions to the panelists. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'm happy to hear that everybody is interested in this instrument. This is it gives us a lot of satisfaction of being working on this. And as I said, within the platform, we've been working on this for quite a time. I just wanted to use a couple of minutes to maybe comment on a couple of issues that have been raised. One is the connection with the innovation funds and the volumes needed to fund the CCfD. I would like to remind something I mentioned very briefly, which is that CCfDs can actually be used in two flavors, right? One flavor, which would be mostly applied to first of a kind or pilot projects, would be the kind in which we are hedging the risk. And on top of that, we are providing some support to compensate for innovation market failures, right? that might be the vehicle through which we allocate the funds in the innovation fund. But then, of course, the concern is, okay, how do we make the innovation fund bigger to apply this CCfD to diffusion? That is not the first of a kind, but to the extension of these technologies. And here the comment I would like to make is that for the diffusion, maybe the level of support we need is not that high. Maybe what we need is to de-risk the investments, as has been mentioned. And de-risking the investments is not that costly, because actually what we are paying for here is for a warranted price, which might very well be the expected price in the market, right? What we are doing is we're providing certainty to the investors that this is going to happen. And so I think what we would need to do maybe is to have an estimation of the volume needed for both flavors, and then see how they can fit within the innovation fund or without or outside the innovation fund. Because of course we need both, and we will need everything to push for the decarbonization. But maybe what we don't need to do is to put everything into the same box, right? And then of course, there have been also some mentions about de-risking OPEX. In my presentation, I only mentioned CAPEX, but of course, OPEX also can be de-risked, and here indexing is a good way to de-risk OPEX. Somebody in the audience also mentioned about dynamic strike prices. For example, when indexing CCfDs, just to mention that the coking coal was just an example. Of course, we need to understand which are the drivers behind the cost of the different technologies, and we can index to several of these raw materials or energy sources. Dynamic strike prices may also be interested, but remember that dynamic strike prices need to be known beforehand, because basically, if not, we are not de-risking anything, right? So when we talk about dynamic, we need to be very careful. I mean, of course, it could be escalating or following different patterns, but they need to be known in advance so that we are able to de-risk. And following maybe Mr. Mensing's comment that carbon prices will only go up, of course, that's what we all expect as the ratchet is pushed. But then, of course, the thing is, there is always, I don't know in your countries, but for example, in my country right now, there is this discussion about deactivating the ETS to protect customers. So there is always the temptation for some member states to kind of relax the ETS whenever there is some concern about competitiveness. If governments or at the national or European level know that when relaxing the ETS, they're also going to have to pay more through the CCfD, well, maybe they think twice. So of course, this is not like the first element that should be considered when implementing a CCfD, but I think it's a welcome feature. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your summary and all your details here on that. And I think we have seen in the discussion chat already that we have received lots of questions as well from the audience. So feel free to post them and to continue to post them. And even if we try to bundle them, of course, today here, and maybe we could also answer them a little later on right after that webinar. But first of all, I received, for example, a very interesting question to Alexandre Paquot from Nicolas Baglin. He is asking, the EU pushes for moving the industry from fossil fuels, natural gas to renewable electricity and hydrogen, as illustrated by the third call of the Innovation Fund. And priority will be given in that part of the call to most major projects like the ones that will least need CCfD. So do you agree with this statement? So dear Alexandre, maybe you have an immediate reaction to that. Thanks.
Yes, I think it's truly correct that with this third call, we are really trying to provide some big, I would say, volume of grants for first of a kind projects in the field of industry for hydrogen and electrification. And we truly hope that there will be a very interesting project. And having heard what Axel and Marco were saying, it is very promising. We also have a very large project pipeline. We know that there are many projects very much coming in Europe. And with this call, we will expect to really select the most promising ones based on excellence, and the ones which will really provide, I would say, the best in terms of also scalability in the future. That's also an important element that we want to support projects based on a number of criteria, but one of them is the technical and financial maturity of the project, so that they can be replicated also elsewhere in Europe. So yes, this is the part of grants that we are providing with this third call, and we will continue to do that. But with the contract for difference, we go one step beyond, because we are really looking with this hydrogen pilot that we want to launch, and also supporting the production of hydrogen, and also looking very much as the OPEX element of the picture, because we've heard also from Marco and Axel that having availability of green hydrogen, which is competitive compared to fossil-based hydrogen, is absolutely critical to decarbonize and electrify industry. So we see very much a combination of the two, and I think it goes hand in hand with what Pedro was saying: support first of a kind project, but also support project deployment, upscaling, and production of hydrogen. Green hydrogen will need support because I think Marco was saying it as well. The costs of producing renewable hydrogen is very high. So we will need somehow to compensate this difference of costs, and the contract for difference is a very strong instrument for that. It brings clarity, certainty for investment, and I think this is what industry is looking for. So I think we will have a good combination of the two. Now, what exactly should be the level and the envelope needed, we are also looking at that. And Pedro, any work you're doing is of course very, very interesting and welcome. And this is why we are having all this discussion with stakeholders to collect as much as information about project, about cost developments, about prospects, about maturity of technologies, and this will really help us to shape the best possible programs in the coming years.
Thank you very much. And let me just jump in with an own question as well to Marco Menzik, because I think that's an interesting perspective as well to hear it from the industry as well. So according to your opinion, which should be the conditions required to be granted a CCfD? Also, if you look at the perspective from political actors, not only the industry, but just the other way around, or maybe we could compromise on that. And do you think that CCfDs could trigger investments in recycling or circularity, and how? That would be very interesting too. Thanks.
Yeah, interesting question. First of all, we're just talking scope 1 and 2 right now, and scope 3 is the next big thing, if it's not already a big thing. And you'll see that a lot of the emissions overall in our industries are in scope 3, are downstream in the value chains, where also I think a next debate with Pedro would be interesting to see how the whole value chain impact works out. They'll be curious to learn. If you look at our modeling in IC 2050, we can double the amount of biomass, for example, but that's from 10 to 20%. And then you run into all kinds of boundaries, hydrogen and electrification, but recycling and using waste as a feedstock is absolutely one of the routes we want to pursue. Quoting the former Director General of ECHA, who said, waste is nothing else than a chemical mixture. We just need to regain the chemicals again. Now, that means investing in recycling. If it brings a technology that has a positive balance for the climate as well, for me, should be eligible. But maybe before the more philosophical question, more and more we should direct our aid to those people who actually do invest in Europe, and also have a few commitments around it for investments in Europe. I think that's a second one. So not only the design of the technology, but making absolutely clear that the plant is and stays and operates for quite some time, would be a criterion to get those support. And if not, you might have to give it back.
Thank you very much for your answer here. And I've seen in the audience a question from Mario Hüttenhofer to Pedro. I would like to read for you. He's saying, most important seems to me the process to define the strike price. It should reflect public interest to not over-subsidize industry. And on the other side, the CAPEX risk needs to be shared. However, I think the investment cannot be fully protected, and also some kind of dynamic strike price is needed, because the ETS mechanism per se causes an increasing price of certificates, which favors the investor. So what kind of dynamic is most useful here? This is asking Mario Hüttenhofer to Pedro. Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree that defining strike price is a very relevant problem. As for the comment on the dynamic strike price and also the evolution of ETS prices, I think I partially answered that before. So the thing is, on the one hand, we need to discuss or we need to get a better idea of what is going to happen with ETS prices. And we have already mentioned the fact that they may be going up, and then there may be temptations from the governments to go down. And then I think Mario later also says that, of course, they may go down when all industry is decarbonizing at a farther stage. And of course, there is less demand then for allowances. Of course, that might be. And in that case, it is also important to keep prices up, because that is the only way in which an inventor can recoup the benefits of his invention of this new technology. So I think, again, we need to keep this incentive to try to keep prices at a reasonable level. Now, is a dynamic strike price something that ensures that? I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary. I think dynamic strike prices may be interesting in some cases. It depends on the characteristics of the evolution of the market, but I think, again, essentially, a strike price needs to be predictable, needs to be certain. And so if by dynamic we mean that it can be escalated to account for higher prices in the market, that's fine. But in the end, it's all the same. The thing is, if we set a certain strike price, what we need to understand is what is going to be the difference with the average expected price over that time period. And that is the hedging part. And everything else we do, besides from indexing, which is another thing, of course, indexing is a different thing. But dynamic is, well, I think a less important element, although, of course, it can be considered. And in fact, I think we mentioned it in the report.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. And then I still have a question to Axel Eggert from Federico Sibaya. I would like to read. He's asking, can CCfDs support the switch from blast furnaces to scrap-fed electric arc furnaces, and could they help increase scrap supply? So maybe you have an answer to that as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Actually, we have a number of projects where we switch over from blast furnace to direct reduced iron and EAF technology. This technology allows us to use more steel scrap in the process. At the same time, it allows us to switch over from coking coal to hydrogen. And from that perspective, I think, yes, that is the way how this can be done. The problem which we have as a European steel industry is that a lot of the scrap which is collected in Europe is being exported. We are talking about 24 million tons of steel scrap every year. We recycle 100% of the steel scrap coming back to the industry in Europe, but a lot is being exported. We need more, and you are currently discussing the waste shipment regulation in the European Parliament, and I think the Parliament makes some progress with that respect, because it's actually absurd that we have very high environmental standards for our treatment facilities for the industry which is receiving the steel scrap, but outside the EU, the standards are much lower in many cases, not in all, but in many cases. And therefore, it must be secured that there's also a level playing field, that only those installations outside the EU receive scrap from the EU, which meet also those standards. That would allow us also to keep some of the scrap here in Europe, which is bitterly needed to achieve our objectives, climate objectives. I hope I have answered the question with that.
Thank you very much. And actually, I'm very happy today that we talk here in this webinar on CCfDs as well, on aspects on the CHIPS Act. Of course, I'm currently working on that in the ITRE committee as well, and also on the raw materials issues in general, because this is very relevant for us in that context as well, in the industry context, and greening the industry as well, of course. But nevertheless, we still have in the chat a question as well to Mr. Paquot. And it would be in German, so maybe you would like to activate the translation button before to hear it adequately, because I will read it in German now. Because Peter Selmke is asking a question, and I will read it in German. Offensichtlich ist die Ausschreibungsmethode eine gute Kombination aus Subvention und marktwirtschaftlichem Wettbewerb. Was aber geschieht nach der Wahl des besten Betriebs mit den anderen? He is asking. Und dann fragt er noch, wie werden die Kontrollen funktionieren zur korrekten Vertragstreue? Dear Mr. Paquot, maybe you have an answer to that as well.
Yes, I think I got it right, I hope, in English. Yes, I think these are good questions. And regarding this, I would say, legal elements, we also are working very hard on having draft contracts, which will be actually published and subject to public consultation. And here we're also looking very closely to what is happening in the UK, but also in Germany, because indeed, to define very precisely in these contracts how to determine all these questions on the design and the operation and the implementation of the auctions is absolutely critical. So I don't think I'm at the position to tell you in detail how it will look like, because we are still looking at it, but we will consult very broadly on this point, because we've realized the importance of it. So I would say, yeah, please follow closely what we will be publishing on our website.
Thank you very much. And I would like to add personally as well a question that would be interesting, but actually I've just seen that Christian Berner had the same in mind, so I will read his one. He's asking, how can SMEs profit from this instrument, and are SMEs in the focus of the Commission when it comes to CCfDs? That is an interesting one as well, so maybe you have thoughts on that too.
So how SMEs could benefit from such program? I think we have there to look at I would say the broader perspective. If we manage to develop a truly value chain for producing, for instance, green hydrogen or green steel or green chemicals, this really means that the whole value chain, including SMEs, will have to transform, and will also have to, I would say, benefit from such a transformation. So it might be that SMEs will not directly benefit for such instruments, but indirectly by creating an environment which is truly, I would say, aligned with the transition towards climate neutrality. We will also support, I would say, also the suppliers in the industry. And I was very recently, for instance, discussing with a supplier of a component of electrolysis. So they might not be directly available for, I would say, support in CFD or for grants under the Innovation Fund, but they are partnering together with, let's say, larger projects. So we see very much happening truly integrated projects which look at the whole value chain. And I think this is something that we very much would say support. So I would say indirectly, yes, we will be able to support SMEs.
Thank you very much. And I also have a question myself to Mr. Pedro Linares again. From maybe you should somehow to answer that question, leave a little the scientific perspective, but maybe this is just not possible because this is your expertise. But from what you have heard today in this discussion, would you think that political actors and the industry go in the right direction, that it's fast enough? And do you think that we will get the transformation required with the help of the CCfDs? Are you optimistic on that, or what is your estimation when you were part listening of that discussion? Thanks.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it falls a bit outside scientific expertise, right? It's more, but anyway. First, I would like to say that I'm an optimistic person. So I always think that we're going to make it. And by listening to the representatives of industry and from the Commission and also the other parties involved, my optimism is reinforced. I think everybody's rowing in the same direction. And I think that's very important, that we are all convinced of what we need to do. Now, a couple of elements here. First, as I already mentioned, I think CCfDs are only part of the picture, right? So of course, they are an essential element to provide certainty to industry, but we cannot just rely on CCfDs or the Innovation Fund, to put another example, to drive this transformation. We need much more, right? And so we need to keep working also in all the other instruments, and the CBAM is one of those that is currently being discussed, but we also need other instruments that will help industry transform and become what we really want to have, right? And that includes also innovation policy, for example, right? So I think that's an important comment. And about the speed, I think that also speed is a concern here, moreover, given the crisis we are living, right? And here, a concern that we have been discussing with it on platform is that, at least in some countries, industry has been left as a non-priority issue. For example, in many national energy and climate plans, industry has been left for, after 2030. And I think that's not the right approach. I think we need to start right now. So I think it's good that we are having these discussions in order to show that we need to have these policy instruments as soon as possible, because we need to start the transformation of industry now if we actually want to arrive at net neutrality in 2050.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very great exchange and discussion with all of you on a rather niche topic, I have to say, but on the other hand, a topic that nevertheless can move a lot on EU policy level and serves as a real incentive for the industry to achieve the climate goals via the Green Deal. And we all know that CCfDs can support positively the EU industry to be able to compete globally and sustainable to secure millions of jobs in the 27 member states. And we would be glad, dear Pedro, if you allow us to send out the power presentation to the audience and the panelists if requested. And yeah, thank you very much, dear audience at home as well on the screens. We have seen that most of them stick with us till the very end. So that's wonderful, because it was very interesting. And thank you so much for your time, and hope we will continue that discussion and looking forward to it. Thank you so much for being with us and for your expertise. Thank you, and see you soon again in a webinar or on a personal basis. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.